everybody, and thanks again for joining us for another episode of Tees Valley Business's EU and International Trade podcast. For those of you aware, this is a series of short podcasts brought to you by the EU Trade Support Team. Hopefully, over the next 10 to 15 minutes, we'll be able to provide you with an introduction to the topic of INCOTERMS, which will be our focus today. Fortunately, you don't have to listen to me throughout, and I'm very happy to be joined by Ben. How are we doing today?
Very good, thanks, Shawnee. Happy to be here.
So, as you know, the plan for today, Ben, is to take a look at INCOTERMS. I want people to understand the importance of INCOTERMS and the dangers of getting them wrong, and how their business should practically apply the INCOTERMS. And throughout, to help us answer these questions, we'll have a look at some of the 11 INCOTERMS. So, firstly, Ben, can you outline exactly what is meant when we say INCOTERM?
Yeah, well, I suppose the easiest way to describe INCOTERMS is they outline how the goods will be transported from A to B, seller to buyer, and the actions or responsibilities of each party on that journey. So the INCOTERMS describe three important parts of trade. So firstly, we've got the obligations, so aka who does what. So who organises the transport or insurance or customs formalities, for example. Secondly, we've got the risk, by which we mean where and when does the seller deliver the goods? So when does the risk transfer to the buyer? And finally, the costs. So which party is responsible for the transit, the packaging, the loading or unloading costs? Now, the INCOTERMS, they're periodically updated. The latest version was introduced in 2020, and currently there are 11 internationally recognised INCOTERMS. And these work on a bit of a sliding scale, easiest way to think about it. At one end, you've got the greatest onus on the buyer. At the other end, you've got the greatest onus on the seller.
Right, okay, so that briefly explains what INCOTERMS are, and we've made reference to how it helps determine who holds the obligations, the risks and the costs for the products on each step of the international trade journey. Also, we've explained how they can be pictured as this sliding scale, with the greatest onus on the seller at one end and the greatest onus on the buyer at the other. But can you give us a bit of context, Ben, as to why they're so important?
Well, I think really for the exact reason that we've already mentioned, before goods are moved, both parties have to understand what they are obliged to do, what risk they bear, and what costs they will incur. Businesses, they don't have to use the INCOTERMS, they're not law, but I suppose the easiest thing to say on that is if you can imagine trying to outline each party's responsibilities from scratch. It would be so easy for something to be misinterpreted, especially if there's a language barrier there. You run the risk of something going wrong. Whereas the INCOTERMS mean that you don't need to consider these issues from scratch. They're ready-made, they're internationally used, accepted and recognised.
So moving on to the next question then, Ben. I know you've seen what can happen when people get their INCOTERMS wrong.
Yeah, I think so, especially when trading with the EU since 1st of January 2021. Prior to that, trading with the EU wasn't really any different from trading, with Manchester, London or Edinburgh. However, if we look at the picture now, businesses need to not only consider the transport costs and responsibilities, but importantly, you've got the customs formalities on top of that, including the declarations and the costs, such as the import VAT and the customs duty. So, you know what, Shawnee? I'll bring you back in now, and I'll show you how this works in practice. Now, I'll act as the UK supplier. You can be my Dutch customer who's a business, so we're selling B2B. Going back to that sliding scale, at one end we've got Ex Works, which puts the greatest onus on you, Shawnee, the buyer. At the other end of the scale, we've got DDP, which puts the greatest onus on me, the English supplier. Now, Ex Works and DDP, they're probably the two most common INCOTERMS and the ones which listeners will be most familiar with. However, Shawnee, can you tell us how Ex Works affects you, bearing in mind the additional customs formalities and costs which I've just mentioned?
Yeah, Ex-works, simply put, is me as the buyer picking up the package from you, the supplier, and being responsible for everything that follows. Now, that includes transport, cost and risk, export and import formalities, including import VAT and customs duty in the Netherlands. All that you, as the supplier, is responsible for, Ben, is making the goods available to me at your warehouse. So it looks like you don't really have much risk or responsibility as the seller.
True, but that can actually cause me a bit of headache, and I think that's what does trip up many sellers who do use ex-works. In order to sell my goods VAT exempt, for UK VAT purposes, I need to prove that they were exported from the UK. Now, how can I prove that they were exported if you were responsible for completing the export declaration? What evidence do I have? What does that leave me with to prove that they're exported? So it could be that ex-works is actually makes life more difficult for me, and is obviously makes life difficult for yourself as well.
Good point. So thinking about the other end of the scale for you as the seller then, what is DDP?
Well, DDP, delivered duty paid, like you said, it puts the greatest onus on me as the supplier. So I'd be responsible for not only delivering the goods, but also the completion of the export and import formalities. So I'm okay for UK VAT purposes, but the big issue now is the payment of the customs duty and import VAT, which will be payable in the Netherlands. Now, let's say I haven't got a Dutch VAT registration, but you, as the Dutch company, do. If you were to pay that import VAT, you should be able to claim that back. But me, without that registration, I won't. So by agreeing to DDP, I'm causing a headache for myself there. I'm practically throwing that money away because I can't reclaim it. For you, Shawnee, DDP means that you can really sit back, you can wait for me to deliver the goods without any responsibilities to worry about. So I think unless you are exporting to a country where you are VAT registered, and you can comply with the VAT regulations, such as a requirement for physical representative, this DDP may not be the right Incoterm for you. And I think, with post-EU trade climate, now we're outside of that trade bloc, that's how we now operate. And these two extremities, ex-works and DDP, they're not always compatible with traders' needs, especially in this new climate. So, Shawnee, can you tell us what would be the closest alternative to ex-works?
Probably the closest alternative to ex-works for me as the buyer is FCA, standing for Free Carrier. Under FCA, you deliver the goods to me when you either A, load the goods onto transport, which I arranged at your premises, or B, you deliver the goods unloaded to an agreed alternative destination and they are at my disposal. But I think the most important difference between ex-works and FCA is that you, as the seller, are responsible for the export formalities. This can be a benefit to both of us, because it means that we don't need to complete the customs formalities in a country where I have no legal or VAT registrations, and you as the seller are able to prove the goods left the UK. So that's FCA, which people may want to explore as an alternative to ex-works. From your point of view, Ben, what might people want to consider instead of DDP?
I think people may find DAP, delivered at place, a better alternative to DDP. So this still means that I'd be delivering the goods to your address. I'd still be responsible for the export declaration in the UK. The only difference is you'd be responsible for the import formalities into the Netherlands. So it'd be your Dutch EURI number and your Dutch VAT registration, which is included on the import declaration. So as a business, like we said before, you should be able to reclaim that import VAT. So in the grand scheme of things, that shouldn't be the biggest concern for yourselves. Now, it may be that DDP or ex-works is still the right Incoterm for your business, and that's totally fine. Or, there are 7 other Incoterms which we haven't discussed here, and you might find that an alternative works a lot better than the 4 that we've just discussed. And again, that's totally fine. I think all we're trying to do here is get people to consider their options and ensure that they fully understand the Incoterm which they are using.
Exactly, because if people are going to agree on the wrong Incoterm, then you run the serious risk of having goods stuck at ports or delays with customs, or you could end up paying unexpected additional costs.
And I think also it's going to help to improve your business relationship, because if something does go wrong, or you need to go back and renegotiate your Incoterms shortly after agreeing a deal, that's not going to help. That's not going to help that relationship. So get it right in the first place. On the cost side of it, we've seen instances where people, believe they've made a good deal for their business, but they later realise that they need to account for the VAT and the duty in another country, for example, and especially if they can't reclaim the import VAT in that country, then all of a sudden that good deal suddenly doesn't look so great for their business. So it's really important that you consider the costs. I'd definitely stick to the saying that it's easier to handle customs in a country where you are established or registered. I think that goes for both you and your supplier or customer, regardless of which country they are based. So whether that's inside the EU or the wider world.
So, final question from me then, Ben. How should people look to practically implement the Incoterms?
Well, I think, we've shown the importance in people agreeing the right Incoterm in their sales contract. So this should be agreed right at the beginning, and both parties, like I said, should be aware of their responsibilities. Now, once you've agreed on the Incoterm, it's vital that it's clearly outlined on the commercial invoice. So you can do that by stating, firstly, the chosen Incoterm. Secondly, the named port, place or point. So what is the delivery point? And finally, end it with the words Incoterm 2020. So include 2020 just so everyone knows which Incoterm edition we are talking about. Now, this ensures that all the parties, including customs, intermediaries, they're fully aware of what has been agreed. And I think on a quick point, while we're talking about that, it's important that you are as specific as possible when stating the named delivery point. For example, you can't just say Rotterdam Port because it's so big, it's huge. If something went wrong, how a party is supposed to know exactly where in Rotterdam Port was that delivery point? Where did that risk transfer? So it's really important that you are as accurate as possible when outlining what the delivery point or where that delivery point is.
Okay, so I appreciate that we've flown over a large topic there, but I hope we've given people an insight into the importance of Incoterms and how they should be used. I'm sure Ben will agree that if anybody needs any further support on Incoterms, then please do get in touch.
Yeah, definitely, Shawnee. And not only Incoterms, but any area of trading with the EU, which, businesses may have found difficult or challenging since the 1st of January 2021 or the changes that are coming up as well. We are a free service for businesses within the Tees Valley area. So really, there's nothing to lose by contacting us. We're happy to help, no matter how big or small the issue is.
Yeah, and there's so many ways in which a business can contact our team. You can access support from our helpline by calling 01642 662 778, or you can contact us via email at EUBusinessSupport@teesvalley-ca.gov.uk, where we'll be able to answer any queries and, if necessary, book a telephone or Teams appointment so we can discuss any issues in more detail. Plus, please visit the Tees Valley Business website, www.teesvalleybusiness.com, to find the latest EU information, our monthly newsletters and our webinar series. I hope you've enjoyed the podcast today, and if so, you can find the rest of the podcast series on the website. All that's left for me to do is to say thank you very much to Ben for all of your help today. I hope that businesses found that useful, and I hope to see you again on a future podcast.
Thank you very much, Shani. Thanks for having me. Like you said, I hope everyone's found it useful, and I hope to join you again.
Thanks again to everyone for listening. That's all from us today. Goodbye.
Cheers.